mid-semester feedback is valuable. So mid-semester feedback, which is different than the end-of-semester evaluations that we get from students on their experience with the teaching and learning in the course, mid-semester feedback does provide the opportunity to receive timely feedback that can actually be applied immediately to the course as you try to improve teaching and learning. So when you think about this mid-semester feedback, I really want you to think about it as formative assessment data. End of the semester is more of a summative assessment data. You get it at the very end. And as we all know as faculty members, that information is useful as we plan for the next time that we teach the course or the next time that we teach in general. We can use that feedback to improve what we do. But mid-semester feedback is more formative in nature. It actually allows us in the middle of the course, in the middle of the instruction, to be able to get information that we can actually use to change and to improve what we're doing in the classroom based on that data and on that feedback. Something else you want to keep in mind is, unlike the summative assessment, the end of the semester feedback you get from students, the formative data that you get is just for you. So even though it's a little nerve-wracking asking students to give us feedback on what's on our teaching and in the learning in the class, this feedback is simply going to come to you, and you get to make decisions in how you use it and what's done with it, and hopefully help shape the end of semester feedback based on your responsiveness to it. So if your goal is to improve teaching and learning, it's a great method, a great way to get information to allow you to do that. Another goal you might have is you actually might want to be improving your end of semester student evaluations, and mid-semester feedback has the potential to help you do that. We know that students respond positively when their comments result in changes to the course, when they feel like their instructor is responsive and interested in what they think about the teaching and the learning that's going on. What happens is that leads to improved student attitude about the class and the instructor, where therefore would lead to hopefully improving their end of course semester student evaluations that you receive. So whenever I'm working with doc students who are teaching for the first time, or new faculty on campus, or faculty that have been teaching for a while, and I make this suggestion about, it'd probably be a really good practice for you to set up during the course opportunities to get feedback from your students so that you can be responsive and make changes and be a little agile in what's happening, to be, in tune with what your students are thinking and experiencing in the course. The first question I get is, well, what kinds of questions are useful? What kinds of questions should we be asking for formative data for mid-semester or periodically through the course to get feedback from our students? And the next question usually is, do you have examples? Well, I need to see what this might look like. So at the Center for Teaching and Learning, there's been a group that's worked over the last semester or so putting together a toolkit which includes example questions that you might use for your mid-semester feedback. I'm going to take a moment and kind of show you what those example questions look like. But I want to preface this by saying these are just for your use and as a guide, but they are in kind of the basis for you to create a feedback opportunity, but you have every opportunity to tailor this, to use the questions that you find useful, but to create your own, because faculty mostly report to me that they get the best information when they get to ask very specific questions that they want to ask and need to know in order to be able to improve the class. So what we're going to share with you are just some example questions and ones that we think will be useful for you to get information that you might be able to actually use in a productive and effective manner. So I'm going to go and bring up a file that shows you these questions. So I think on your screen right now you see the mid-semester evaluation questions. We've grouped them where the first 3 questions give you information that students can respond to related to their experience as a student in the class. So, it's important for them to be able to report out how they feel about their learning. Are they developing the skills that they need in the class? Are they understanding the material? And this is a really interesting question. Can they apply what they learned in class to new situations? How useful and at what level of learning do they feel like they are achieving in the class? The next set of questions are more related to their experience with you. Do they feel that the instructor is approachable, that the instructor actually motivates them? They find the activities, materials, and assessments as interesting and engaging. The last one we know is very essential to student learning is that they're around the feedback they're getting. Do the students perceive the feedback they're getting is helping them to learn? The last set of questions are just related to their experience in the course so far. So around whether assignments are clear, whether the course supports their understanding. Are the out-of-class assignments helpful in preparing them for the larger assessments in class? Do they get sufficient opportunities to practice and get feedback? And the last question here on the multiple choice Likert scale is, do the assessments match what we're being asked to learn? This last set of questions are more open-ended, and I find that faculty really appreciate the information they get from open-ended questions, so I would encourage you to include open-ended questions to allow students to write more around their suggestions. So what has been helpful is one of the questions. What's caused them difficulty? What concepts or ideas do they feel they don't fully understand? And lastly, what suggestions do they have that you could do to enhance their learning experience in the class? And they can write freely to these kinds of questions. So these are the ones that will give you, a lot of information and more insight into their thinking around the class, and they are ones that, that you can definitely analyze and do a lot of thinking around if you ask these types of questions. So I'm going to turn it over to Lynn, who's going to point you to the toolbox and kind of walk you through how you can use the resources that are there to design and set up a format for your questions that works best for you.
What we are going to take a look at now is the toolkit that CTL has put together, and you may have seen it advertised, on our webpage. I think it went out in the email recently. So I'm going to go ahead and share my desktop with you. And if you go to teaching.uncc.edu, there's a really bright announcement right here on the home page. I'm not going to use that because I want you to be able to find it once we stop advertising for it. But if you go to services and programs, and here in teaching guides, actually, there is a whole section just for mid-semester feedback, and this is where our toolkit is at. And the middle of the page holds all of the tools and resources we have created for you. We have a Canvas survey quiz package, which you can use to load directly into your Canvas course. The settings on it are already set to be anonymous and ungraded, so your students can just go into Canvas and take the survey, and then you can view the results anonymously after they have turned it in. And we also have a list of Poll Everywhere questions that have been formatted for easy import into Poll Everywhere, as well as the document that Tracy showed you a little bit earlier that just have the questions on it. And if you need any assistance with using any of those resources, you can view the video that we have posted here below, as well as the print instructions to get those loaded to Canvas, to use them in Poll Everywhere, or just to download that Word document. See now.
Thank you, Lynn. So once you have created the feedback questions you want in whatever format, whether it's Poll Everywhere, or Canvas, or as a paper copy you want to give out in class to have students respond to, the big question becomes then, what do I do with this feedback? So we're going to talk about just maybe some steps of how to analyze and some tips for reviewing the feedback once you get it from students. So first of all, you want to just carefully consider what students say. You want to go into it with the right mind frame of, being receptive and responsive to what are my students telling me about their experiences and how they are learning in the class. My recommendation is to first look over the positive comments about the course. I think it's always a good practice to start out with not the negative, but to start out with what's going well and what are the students saying that is working for them in the class. So look over the positive comments first. Spend a little time with them and get a good sense of how the students are reacting in a positive way to the course. Then it would be time to kind of start to look and examine their suggestions for improvement. One analysis technique that's worked really well for me in the past is as I'm looking over their suggestions for improvement and what the data is telling me, I start to group the suggestions and the ideas into three categories. First, those that I can change this semester. I'll then group other comments and suggestions and things that must wait until next time the course is offered. For example, if the students are not happy with the textbook or there's something that's already like in place like that that's not possible for you to change currently, I would put those kinds of suggestions and tips into the, well, I'll think about that. I'll review this feedback again and consider their suggestions, but that's really something that I can't address right now in the middle of the course. And then you want to have a category for those things that you either cannot or for pedagogical reasons you will not change. Sometimes students have reactions or suggestions around set requirements of the course. For example, you have an agreed upon assignment or course ways of, there's 3 tests in the course or things like that that's been agreed upon by the faculty and it's across all the sections of the course. Those are things that you really cannot change, and so you would put those into a different category. You want to think through them and think about why there are certain things you can change and certain things you cannot, and be prepared and ready to explain those decisions. But it's really helpful just to start organizing the data, putting them into these categories, because then you will have, a set of data and information organized in a way you can do something about it. So just by you doing the midterm feedback with your students, it gives students the message that you really do care about how they are, what their experiences are in the class, and their reactions to how the course is moving along. But it's not important just enough to give it. You actually need to respond to the data and report back to the students. What are the outcomes of them engaging in that process of giving you this feedback? So the first thing you want to make sure to do is let students know what will and will not change as a result of their feedback. So you've taken time to kind of carefully consider this. You've sorted the data. And now it's an opportunity to share back and report to students that analysis. I find that students, if they know that you actually listen to their feedback and they can hear your rationale behind what you can change and what you cannot change, and then why some things are not going to be able to be addressed, or you're not going to be able to respond to some of the feedback, they appreciate that, and they tend to be positive that even if you don't if you're not able to meet their suggestions or to address the suggestions that they brought up. So just letting them know what will or will not change. I always kind of present this to students by talking to them about, after reviewing the data, this is what I've learned. These are things that I plan to do as a result of getting this feedback. And I'll lay out some of the changes that we'll make. I will also talk to them about things I cannot do and why. And then I make sure to spend time with some of their suggestions or some of their feedback and talk about what they can do to improve their outcomes in their course. If there's confusions, if they are struggling with certain things, I'll make sure to remind them about office hours and the importance of asking questions in class and coming to see me. Things that they can do in terms of getting feedback, that opportunities they may have forgotten about or not taking advantage of. So I always put it back on them a little bit too of what they can be doing as a result of the information I've learned to improve the outcomes of the course. You're also going to want to have to think about how you're going to respond to student feedback. You can simply lead a whole class discussion around the data, around the issues, and talk to them frankly about, what you found in it, and how you're going to address it. When you do that, I would make sure to present things in a very neutral way. You don't want to seem defensive or overly apologetic or anything like that. Just in a more neutral way. This is what you've heard, and this is what you're planning to do, and these are suggestions you have for them. A lot of times you'll uncover as you engage in discussion with them that they have just a lot of misconceptions or different expectations than what you assumed they had about the course, and you can clear those up, provide additional information, refer them back to the intended objectives for the course and how what is happening aligns with those, and just have some conversation with them to maybe help them to have a better understanding or correct any misunderstandings around those areas. You might even present the data to them with graphs and charts and make them accessible to them on Canvas if that's how you would like to present it to them. But you'll just need to think about how you're going to respond. A really quick important tip is to make sure when you do respond that you do it in a respond quickly to their feedback. I try to make sure I have time to analyze, look through the data, and be prepared the next time I meet with them, or definitely within the next week, to present the outcomes of that mid-semester feedback that they provided for me. I respond to it and give it back to them in a quick way. That way, things can be addressed more quickly, adjusted more quickly, and the students feel that you are being responsive. And most of all, thank students for their comments. Hopefully when you began this process with them, you clearly communicated with them the reason you were doing it, how you were going to use the information to actually improve your teaching and improve their learning, and it was for those purposes. And so really thank them for participating. We want our students on this campus to become part of our culture of continuous improvement learning and feel that, it's invaluable for them to provide feedback to the faculty when they ask for it and when they're given opportunities to do it. So make sure to thank them for that. Interestingly enough, if some people are interested in mid-semester feedback too because they're interested in improving their end-of-course evaluations. And I just wanted to share with you what we do know from research on those end-of-course evaluations. The things that faculty do that significantly improve the students' outcomes or approvals of the end-of-course evaluations of the teaching and learning that occurred. These were 4 things that consistently came up in the research. Is students where they felt they were engaged in active and practical learning that emphasized the relevance of course material to the students. If they felt like that, there were significantly higher responses on the end-of-course evaluations. Students feel like creating, when there's opportunities for significant teacher-student interactions and conferences that allow instructors to connect with them, they tend to rate those professors higher, those instructors higher. So that it is important that students get significant interactions with you. Sometimes faculty will figure out opportunities for conferences, individual conferences with students, and if you can figure out how to make that work in your course, it does tend to have a significant contribution to the end-of-course evaluations. Emphasizing student learning outcomes and setting high expectations, interestingly, students recognized as important, and revisions and improvements to how student learning is assessed also lent itself to higher end-of-course evaluations. So as you look over those things, you can see that the mid-semester feedback that you receive might allow you to make some changes in the course, emphasize or clarify the outcomes and the high expectations and how you have working to improve how the learning is assessed and the opportunities that students have to demonstrate their learning. Those are things that might be outcomes of the data that you get during the mid-semester and therefore will lead to more positive end-of-course evaluations for you from your students. So as you're considering all this information, we do recognize that sometimes, we get feedback from students and sometimes we're just not sure what to do with it, or we really struggle with how do I address this, or what is an effective practice that I might try to implement now that I've learned this is a concern or a problem with students, or that I know it would improve the learning that's going on in the class. What we suggest is that you don't try to go it alone, that you definitely want to consult with others. You want to find trusted colleagues and mentors that you can start conversations around teaching and learning with. You don't necessarily have to open yourself up that you're having a problem in your course, but you can talk about, you know, what with a trusted colleague or mentor, when you've had this, you know, in your class, what have you tried? What has worked for you? You know, what are things that I might consider as a way to address this in my course, in my classroom? Sometimes those conversations don't happen in our hallways, in our offices, but what we do find is, well, you know, most faculty, when they're asked, they are very eager and willing to talk about their practice. So feel confident in starting those conversations, and definitely talk with your trusted colleagues about the data you're getting, or the issues that have been raised from it. Also, don't forget that you can contact UNC Charlotte Center for Teaching and Learning and arrange an individual consultation. We have a number of faculty fellows. We have instructional designers and instructional leaders here that can definitely find a time to meet with you and talk about some of your the data that you're receiving and some of the concerns you have, and make suggestions or give you ideas. We even have opportunities to provide observations of your classroom if that would be valuable for you, to get additional input and insights around things that you know that you're working on in your practice. So feel free to contact us and let us know how we can be of help.
Tracy, and I wanted to add just really quickly an example that we have of this. At my previous institution, I taught English composition courses, and a colleague of mine who was actually sort of a mentor when I first started teaching retired a couple of years after I started working there, and she had been in composition and literature for a very long time, like 20 plus years of teaching, and she actually retired and moved over to the art department where she started teaching a survey of art course. And one of the things that she commented on a little bit, you know, after a few semesters after making that transition was that her student evaluations were not as good teaching her art survey class as they were teaching her composition class. She was kind of famous as a composition instructor at this college, but then kind of infamous as an art survey instructor. And what it actually was is that she took the same assessment techniques from her English composition courses and moved them over to the art survey courses, where a lot of students didn't really feel like that was aligning with what the course was supposed to be about. And so rather than telling her, they didn't say anything, it all came through in those final course evaluations. And so a mid-semester feedback opportunity like this may have been something that would have given her that information when it actually may have made a difference for her in order to result. And she was retired and she was part-time, so I don't know if she really cared as much about student evaluations as she would have, you know, 10 or 15 years earlier in her career, but she did care about the student experience. So mid-semester feedback is all about helping with that. So I would like to point out there is a link in the chat forum. It's a bit.ly to a Google document that we created so that you can post any questions that you have later if you don't want to ask them right now. But feel free to access that document. We'll monitor that and answer any questions you put on there. If you're going to have questions, try to get them in today so that we're not chasing after that document forever. But we do have about 3 minutes left, so we can open that up for questions now. And you can post in the chat forum as well if you don't have a mic. So Carol, you're posting, if the survey is anonymous and not graded, what type of response rate do you get? I honestly don't really know how to answer that question. I think that it's going to be how you frame it, right? How students feel. Tracy, what are your thoughts on that?
I definitely think, you know, accountability is helpful in terms of getting higher response rates. When I've done it in my course, I have always given it out as a paper copy and given them the last few minutes of class to do it. And so when I do it in that format, my response rate's 100% because they will at least, not necessarily how the quality of it, the feedback they give me, but they definitely do at least provide the feedback. I have not yet done it through Canvas or Poll Everywhere, so I'm not sure how that will work in terms of response rates. You know, even though it's, yes, and with it being anonymous, I'm not sure how we could hold them accountable for it. But I think a lot of times when the students realize that the purpose of it and the intention, so I go back to that comment I made about really clearly elaborating to students about how you're going to use the information, and it's really important to shape their experience, that I think you'll probably be pleasantly surprised that possibly more of them will participate than you might think they would with it not being, you know, held accountable for it.
About if the survey is anonymous and not graded, or I'm sorry, could Canvas record who completed it? Sam is about offering bonus points for completing the survey. I think that if you have a large section, you can do the anonymous and then actually have like a pass-fail associated, so you can't see what everyone's individual responses are, but you can see who did them, or who actually completed the survey. I think that in a larger section, that would be fine, but if you only have 8 or 9 or 10 students, your sample size is so small there, but that I think that threatens the anonymity just a little bit, and we definitely don't want students to think that they might be penalized for offering feedback, but that is a good option, Karen, and if you need any help getting that set up, I know that you can call the Canvas hotline, the help support, and they can talk to you about all of those settings and the availability of those settings for the quizzes. Okay, those were wonderful questions. Thank you so much. It is 1 o'clock, so I'm going to leave you with a list of our upcoming webinars. We've got some really great ones coming up. One here on the 19th, Hints and Tricks for Accessible Canvas course by our own Carol Gordon here in CTL. Then a webinar from the library on ebooks, which is extremely helpful for your students in alleviating some of that, the money spent on textbooks. And then a few other sessions as well coming up in November. So please do sign up and attend those if you are interested. And like I said, please post any questions that you have additionally to that Google Drive document. We'll be happy to answer those questions after the session. Okay, thank you.